Welcome to the riskadvisor.com podcast. I am Jim Henry and here with my good friend, co-host, and guest, Sal Lafreri. Today's topic is risk is inversely proportional to common sense. So the reason that we are doing this today and the reason that Sal is both co-host and guest is we got feedback on our series that, the two of us have a wealth of experience. We ought to be talking about more stories. We ought to be giving more of our background. And here we are trying to be, polite to our guests and not eating up, too much of their time. So we said, you know what? Okay, let's do some to get out some of those perspectives and backgrounds. And what better way to start than doing a series on common sense, which I think we both feel as if we've built up over our decades of our careers. And the reason that Sal makes the perfect guest for this one is that, he's come more from the law enforcement side, background in the Office of Emergency Management, crisis management, hostage negotiating teams, and what have you, where, my perspective has been more on the electronic side. And, we both counted on the fact that, we could rely on common sense from all sorts of perspectives. Common sense and where you would deploy electronic security and, going for the greatest return, on investment, and common sense on how you're handling, the issues or perpetrators or whatnot that you are identifying with those solutions. But when common sense starts to fall apart, our whole world of how we approach risk and whatnot really comes under attack. So I said, let's attack this head on. Let's really identify the fact that what we used to think was common sense is no longer common. And from my perspective, the greatest risk that CEOs and corporations face today is that we can no longer rely on common sense as it is no longer common. So Sal, with that wide intro, is that not a big problem that we are facing today?
Somewhere along the line, I get the feeling like I created a monster because I was the one that said, let's do something on common sense. Yeah. So, and then we started thinking about it and went, shit, what did we do? Yeah, no, common sense is it's just not there no more. It's not a key element. It's not a key factor. When you would go through, when you were faced with crises and you're faced with issues that pop up in front of you, if you didn't have a plan, you try and use common sense. What's the next best thing that I can do? What can I do? And, I had this once in a homicide case, and it was a little kid that had been killed. And later on, someone who was doing some research came to me and said, I really love the protocol that you followed. And I said, what protocol? He said, we don't have any. And he said, well, what did you do? How did you come up with it? And I said, it was just common sense. I just, what I thought came next, but in today's world, you just don't get that. It's a level set that just isn't there anymore.
Well, it's a fear factor now that, when you apply common sense and you're using any sort of subjective determination, somebody is going to say that you have a prejudicial view because of some agenda that you have. And that is really what is undermining, so much of our culture and society and businesses today. And it's handicapping, law enforcement from doing what's logical in law enforcement, right? This is not going to lead any place good. We have to get back to the point where we are fact-driven, that we follow the rule of law, we enforce the rule of law, that we have mechanisms in our society to change laws, but that's not for law enforcement to subjectively do.
But wait a second, one of the things that you just said, right? We have to enforce the law, and what has occurred over the last maybe 3 years, 4 years, is selective enforcement, right? You can't go down that slippery slope, and you can't say, well, we're not going to enforce this. We just, it's just not right. So that law, we're going to ignore it. We're not going to do it. We saw it in the city, right? With fare beating, right? Something as simple as fare beating, where the prosecutors come out and say, look, we're no longer going to be, a collection agency for the MTA. So if somebody, beats them on the fair, they got to worry about it. We can't have law enforcement arrest them. And what winds up happening is they don't want arrests anymore for fare beating. Well, you can't selectively enforce the law that you want, right? That, common sense says, the law is the law. And if you really don't like the law, then, go back to the state legislature, get the law taken off of the books and say, okay, make it go. But you can't selectively enforce it. And that's the thing that's really causing the biggest well, maybe not the biggest heartache, because there's a ton of big heartaches in this, but the heartache in it. And when you look at the officer on the street who, is sitting there trying to figure out what am I supposed to enforce, what am I not supposed to enforce, becomes a problem.
Right. And that undermines morale then. And of course, the public takes a look at that. And for those that are more adventurous, wanting to push the envelope, they sense an opening there. And all it does is invite more and more testing of that or pressuring that envelope because they know that there's going to be no retribution. Then you get to the lunacy, of there being organizations out there to just, bail people out that are openly violating the law. And it seems to be endorsed by government. This is ironic that we're recording this podcast before any of the hearings have been had for, Amy Coney Barrett, for the Supreme Court. But the one thing that, that I feel from my perspective is refreshing from what she said is she says, my opinions don't matter. I'm a judge, right? The judge's responsibility is to uphold the law as written. It is Congress's responsibility to write the laws or to modify the laws. That is the structure that we've had for a few hundred years. It's worked pretty damn well for us.
Yeah, but the problem, and again, everything gets prefaced by, but the problem, the problem, we have gone so far to the point where how we lose common sense. We've gone so far to the point that, everybody always had their rights. But everybody now has a voice and everybody now has to be listened to. And it's no longer the general public. It was always, the general public's view on something, right? The majority vote got you whatever. Today, every single last person has an opinion, regardless of how cockeyed one may look at it to be. Right? It could be diametrically opposed to a belief I have, or it could be absolutely ridiculous. And the person still winds up with that right, still winds up with the right to be heard, and more importantly, is getting reaction. I mean, you look at, and this is something you're better suited at and have a little bit more experience on, corporations being, in essence, extorted for money. Being shaken down for money, right? They're reacting to what is being put in front of them as this public outcry. And when you shake it down, what does it come down to? A couple hundred people are just, becoming vocal. And now all of a sudden, I'm a firm believer. We were talking about this earlier. I'm a firm believer that if you took all of the corporations that have paid what I call shakedown money, if you take all of these corporations that have paid this money and put them in a room and say, really, what do you think? They probably will tell you, my guess is that they will tell you that they're just not, they weren't into it. That it's not their belief that, this is all wrong. But they'll tell you that their hands are tied, that they had to do something, that they have to answer to the the public, to the shareholders in the company, and they wind up participating in these programs and doing things, and it's just absolutely horrendous. There are a lot of good programs, a lot of good diversity programs that are out there that should be had, that are very well intentioned, very well structured, and are appropriate. And then you wind up with these other situations where you get a select few going on social media making, in essence, threats, and the company's acquiescing to it and paying. It's just so wrong. And you just don't know, where is the end going to come?
Well, the trigger point seems to have been, as you say, social media, right? And in Up until a decade or so ago, our society is a democracy. It's based on majority rule. Well, majority rule has kind of morphed into mob rule, as we've seen recently. And the mob doesn't have to be big.
No.
The mob could be just 100 people out of 300 million, right? But all of these one-offs are getting more play, in the media, than anything that comes close to, a majority opinion. And it's driven by a number of factors. One of them, if it happens to play into a narrative that somebody's trying to weaponize for, political purposes, then there you go. That's what triggers it. And, but that fundamentally, is in conflict with the basic, tenets of our democracy. And how small of a mob is too small of a mob to ignore? I mean, at this point, it could be even just one person, that just captures it and goes viral and what have you. So it's just undermining any logical way to deal with a problem. Generally, you would think if you've got a one-off, like we've had with some issues on law enforcement, you go and you deal with the bad apple. But it's immediately, turning the entire program, the whole concept of law enforcement. And there's a new term that I've heard, reimagining law enforcement. Well, you can't reimagine law enforcement if you have no law enforcement on the street. That's imagining that somebody's going to come to your defense.
That works well. That works real well. You look at social media and it is just absolutely fascinating what happens. So in my last role with government, I was director of security and intelligence operations, and I get asked a lot of times about, from the intelligence side of the house about, the abuses and being able to, listen in on phone calls and tracking emails and whatever. And I marvel at it. And I did his talk, and I may have mentioned this in a prior show. I had done a talk, I believe it was out in Pepperdine University, and we were talking to the students about dealing with being bugged, how, the government can abuse their powers and their privileges. And I said to him, for starters, it'd be foolish of me to sit here and tell you that abuses of those powers that never don't occur, right? Because they do, right? Human nature being human nature, you're going to find people that are going to do that, and that you're going to have those abuses. But for the most part, right, and 99% of the time, what you're going to have is there are incredible tight security and protocols that's in place for us to have the ability to use that. If I'm going to put a wire, if I'm going to listen to your phone calls, I want to wiretap your phone, I got to put in a request. I got to go to a judge. I got to prove why I need to do it. Within 30 days, I got to come back and explain what I got, where I'm going, what I need, right? There's tight controls. Look at social media today. I only wish that I had the ability to be able to spy on people as much as the social media companies and these apps out there have the ability to do. And when I told the students, I said, listen, if them spying on you doesn't piss you off, then at least get pissed off to the fact that they're spying on you, taking your information and selling it and not sharing the money with you. Mm-hmm. And then you take it one step further and you say, okay, they got all of this information. Now what? And then you realize, and this is exactly what's happening today, is the social media organizations are filtering what you get to see. And it gotten to a point where it's virtual brainwashing. You used to be able to, the average person used to be able to go online, be able to look something up, get two different viewpoints, understand two different viewpoints, pick a side that they liked, ultimately argue their point, right? You could have a debate, you could have an intelligent debate, you can have an intelligent argument with it. Right? You can take it all the way down, but there was always some commonality where you understood at least both sides. In today's world, and especially when and I see this at home, with kids, they only see one side of it. And there is no other side for them. And it's a form of brainwashing that they're going through. If you want to do an example, take two laptop computers, take your computer and your wife's laptop, or two friends' computer, whatever. Just take two different computers, put them down, type the same phrase into Google.